In March 1964, 28-year-old Kitty Genovese was murdered in cold blood right outside her apartment block in New York City. This murder case pops up in Psych 101 cases all around the world. Not because it's an example of criminal behaviour or because it's an example of victim behaviour, but because it's an example of bystander behaviour. See, on that night, Kitty's screams could be heard by her neighbours. Many would have had a clear view of her getting stabbed, and many would have known that she was left for dead, but no one decided to help. Why? Well, folks, this is the bystander effect. I'm Hayden, psychologist in Australia, and this is Mind Cartography. What is the bystander effect exactly? Well, it's based off this research by Biblatane and John Darley, who were puzzled but inspired by Kitty's story. Inspired the right word? Maybe influenced by? Spurred on by? Maybe spurred on by Kitty's story, because it's pretty harrowing to think of. Anyway, they set up this experiment where they had university students talk about their experiences so far at college. During the conversation, a research associate posing as a student faked a seizure. Participants saw this happen right in front of their eyes. If they were the sole witness, there was an 85% chance they'll report the incident. But if they believed other people had witnessed the event too, these rates for reporting dropped down to 31%. In these findings, Latane and Darley had just unearthed the bystander effect. The tendency to ignore people in need when there are other people present. Look, I'm sure we'd all like to think that this isn't us, but the bystander effect doesn't discriminate. Case in point, I found myself in a bystander situation not too long ago. I saw this couple fall as they were trying to get off the elevator, and even though it did eventually help, it wasn't immediate. I waited until it was clear that they needed some extra help, because, well, I deflected to the idea that other people would help. And I thought maybe if I got into there, I would just crowd the situation and make it worse. To be honest, I think a little bit of me just wanted to not look like a fool too, and think I would be doing it wrong. But yeah, like, as you can see there, everyone's vulnerable to the bystander effect. And it translates across face-to-face and online incidents, serious and non-serious incidents, and adults and across children too. It seems no one's immune. But why is that? Hang on a second, before I get into the causes of it, I want to try something.
I was trying to show the bystander effect, but guess Harlow's not a bystander. Did not go to plan. Oh well, thank you, Harlow.
Yeah, okay, that was a failure. Anyway, what causes the bystander effect? At the heart of it, the phenomenon is rooted in indecision. Most people are kind-hearted and they do care. It's just that they can't decide whether they are needed or not. Think about it, why else would people help when they're alone but not help when there's a large group of people around? It doesn't make any sense like that. Over the years, researchers have put forward 3 different explanations for this indecision. The first is diffusion of responsibility. The more people around, the more the responsibility is split. If it's just you, it's clear you're responsible for helping. If there's 2 of you, it's a 50-50 split, so chances are you'll both probably end up helping. But if there's 20 people around, well, that responsibility is split 20 ways. So there's a 1 in 20 chance maybe that you're gonna help out. And if you're all thinking someone else will help, well then who will? The second explanation is evaluation apprehension. This is the concern that if you do help, but you do it wrong or it isn't needed, then you look like a complete fool. It's based all around this kind of fear of judgment and embarrassment. And it kind of makes a bit of sense when you think that if you help in an emergency situation, it puts you right in the center of the spotlight. The last explanation is pluralistic ignorance. This is the idea that no one is helping because no one sees it as an emergency. This is one of the main arguments put forward for the Kitty Genovese case. It wasn't clear to neighbours what exactly was going on, so they didn't help, sadly. Look, these explanations are all fair. You've probably even seen them play out in your own life. One blind spot to me, though, is what about the impact of personality? Surely there's some people that are just more likely to help because they're more empathic people, and surely there's a lot of people out there that won't help because they're just apathetic people. Well, in 2018, researchers assessed the impact of sympathy and personal distress in a bystander situation. Personal distress being the discomfort level of being connected to an emergency situation where you might be needed to help. Researchers found that when witnessing an emergency situation, those with higher levels of sympathy and those with higher levels of personal distress were faster at responding than those with low levels of both. However, this was only the case for when there was no other bystanders though, so just one-on-one they were the sole person helping out. When we saw the number of bystanders increase, we saw the likelihood of helping decreased. But this was only the case for those with high levels of personal distress. People with high levels of sympathy would help regardless of whether they were the only bystander or whether there was multiple other bystanders there that could help too. To summarize, people with high sympathy are the ones likely to help out in an emergency situation regardless of how many other people are around. And those with high levels of personal distress in those situations are only likely to help out when there is a very low number of bystanders around. Now I know this seems to explain it very well, but we can go one step further. Let's talk about why some people show that personal distress response whilst others show that sympathy response. According to the researchers, we all have an innate reflexive response in emergency situations. It's basically the fight or flight response, but it's also known as that personal distress response. The reaction is instantaneous and we can't really control it. However, after a second or two, we have the opportunity for a more reflective response to gain a bit more control over how we respond to this situation. It's at this point where we have the chance to think about what's going on and make an informed decision about what we want to do. Basically, the two systems are set up to make sure that we protect ourselves first and then assess if we can and if we should help others. The likelihood of whether we help or not is then based on how we deal with those two responses. So yeah, there we go. That's the breakdown. Still reckon you would help? Maybe now that you know a little bit more about the bystander effect, you might. Maybe. But then again, I know about it and I was still vulnerable to it. Alright then, well, is the bystander effect just inevitable? Is it just going to plague society for as long as we know? Or is there something we can do about it? Well, I'm glad you asked. Me, thank you. I'm glad I asked myself. There are things we can do on an individual, interpersonal, and a societal level. At the individual level, people are more likely to help if they're in a positive emotional state, if they can relate to the victim's experience, and if they believe they can actually do something. At the group level, obviously chances are better when the group is small, but it's also better if the victim is friends with the bystanders and when there is good communication among bystanders. And then at the situation level, things like how much of an emergency it is, how safe of a setting it is, and how clear it is that the victim needs help all influence bystander behavior. So I guess if you ever find yourself in the unfortunate situation of being a victim, make it look hella worse than it actually is. Scream your lungs out, point out people in the crowd, make eye contact, and well, if they still don't help, well then they'll look like the biggest jerk around. Just make it clear, you know, that it's an emergency situation. That should increase your chances. Lastly, there's things that can be done and are being done on a societal level. In Australia, we have many programs targeting bystander behaviour on different socio-cultural issues. The SOAR program trains students and teachers to call out racism. Showing Up runs a bystander intervention program aimed at confronting Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. White Ribbon has a whole media campaign targeted at teaching young men to stand against violence against women, i.e. to call it out. And many schools teach students how to be bully upstanders, someone that supports the person being bullied instead of being just another onlooker. All these programs have shown positive outcomes. Just take this testimonial from Showing Up.
We have a dilemma sometimes we face, hey, should we ignore this? Because if you're ignoring it, you may be encouraging it, or do you respond? And that brings us to the question, how do you respond, number one, in an effective way, number two, minimizing harm, and number three, in a way that's actually not essentially just, targeting the perpetrator, but in an environment where even the perpetrator can learn better and to be much more inclusive and maybe change their attitude.
Now that we know all this stuff about the bystander effect and how it affects us, I want to take you back to the story of Kitty Genovese. See, the media's headlines are not actually the full story. Some bystanders did actually stand up for Kitty. Kitty was first attacked out in the street, and a neighbour yelling from their window scared the attacker off. And as that attacker ran away, multiple neighbours then called the police. This attacker was relentless though, and he came back a second time to finish Kitty off. only this time Kitty was in an alleyway hidden from plain view. But that again didn't stop bystander intervention. Thankfully, another neighbour had a viewpoint of this second attack and called the police as they witnessed it happening. Meanwhile, they also called on another neighbour to go down to Kitty as she was bleeding out, and this neighbour held her in her arms until the ambulance arrived. Not that any of these details changed the groundbreaking results from the bystander effect studies, but hopefully they give you a little bit more hope in humanity, that we're not always going to stand there as bystanders while someone is brutally murdered. But that does it, folks. That is the bystander effect in all its mystery. Hopefully this video leaves you with a new focus in life, to be an upstander and not a bystander. If you enjoy learning about these kinds of psychological phenomena, you might also be interested in learning about the imposter syndrome. This is another phenomenon whereby people feel like an imposter, a fraud, despite having all the qualifications needed to fill their position. You can check this video out right here. Otherwise, press that like button if you enjoyed this one, subscribe if you're keen on more awesome psych content, and I'll see you in the next video.